There is a sentence that, when a man finally lets himself say it without flinching, rearranges entire sections of his memory. Some people never loved me. They loved what I provided. It does not arrive easily. It arrives after years of small confusions. The friend who only laughed loud when you were paying. The woman who looked at you with warm eyes during the good months and with strange distance during the hard ones. The family member who praised your ambition while your money was visible and got quiet when your money was tight. The colleague who treated you like a brother when you had access to influence and treated you like a stranger when the influence shifted. None of these moments, on their own, were proof. Each of them could be explained away. People are busy. People are stressed. People have their own problems. The doubt always had a reasonable disguise, but underneath every doubt, there was a pattern. And patterns are louder than explanations. You may have noticed for years that certain people's affection seemed to follow certain conditions. Their warmth had a rhythm that strangely matched what you were producing for them. When you were useful, they were attentive. When you were generous, they were close. When you were giving access, they were affectionate. And when those things contracted, even slightly, their love mysteriously contracted with them. Not all at once, not in dramatic ways, just enough that you started feeling a coldness creeping into the spaces where their warmth used to live. You explained it away because the alternative was too painful. The alternative was that some of the people you considered your inner circle were not in fact your inner circle. They were, in the colder language of human nature, your clients. They were not invested in you. They were invested in the function you performed for them. This is the part most men cannot say out loud, even in their own head, for years. Because once you say it, it forces a different relationship with your past. The dinners, the birthdays, the late-night conversations, the years of shared experience, suddenly they have to be looked at again. Not all of them turn out to be hollow. Some of them were real, but some of them, when re-examined under colder light, revealed themselves to have been performances that you had been funding all along. You had been paying for love that was never sold to you under that label. There is a man sitting on the edge of his bed at 36, going through old photos. Most of the faces still feel familiar, but there is a strange feeling in his chest that he cannot at first name. He keeps looking at certain people and noticing that their presence in his memory does not actually match the warmth he had felt at the time. He remembers giving, carrying, showing up, solving, hosting, funding, defending, listening. And he remembers, vaguely now, that the receipt was rarely returned in the same currency. He had told himself that love is not transactional, that love does not keep score, that he was the kind of man who gave because he could, not because he expected. That belief is noble in principle. It is also, when not balanced by clear sight, one of the most expensive beliefs a man can hold. Because while he was deciding not to keep score, other people were keeping perfect score. They knew exactly what they were receiving. They knew exactly what they were not giving back. They knew exactly when his usefulness peaked. And they knew exactly when to recalibrate their affection once it began to decline. They were not necessarily evil. Many of them were not even consciously calculating. Their behavior was running on an older, more primal program. A program that human beings have run on since long before any of us were born. The program of conditional attachment to utility. This monologue is not about hating those people. It is about finally seeing them clearly so that you can stop being deceived by your own kindness. If this is the first time you have allowed yourself to think this thought, write scene. Because the men who refuse to ever ask this question are the men who keep rebuilding the same disappointments for the next 30 years of their lives. There is an old illusion that human affection is mostly about who you are. The deeper truth is that, for many people, human affection is mostly about what you do for them. This is not a cynical claim. It is a structural one. Human beings are wired by millions of years of evolution to bond around survival, resource exchange, status, and security. The romantic language of modern culture often hides this fact under softer words, but the mechanics underneath have not changed nearly as much as we would like to believe. Most attachments contain a component of utility. Some attachments contain almost nothing but utility, dressed up in the vocabulary of feeling. This means that for a significant portion of the people in your life, your value to them is being silently calculated, not always consciously, often unconsciously, but it is being tracked. What you provide: emotional support, financial stability, social access, status by association, entertainment, distraction, advice, attention, validation, protection, comfort, opportunity, is being weighed day after day against the cost of keeping you close. Most people do not even realize they are doing this. They simply notice that they like being around you. They mistake the steady supply of benefits for the existence of love. As long as the supply continues, the affection feels real. They are not lying. They genuinely feel something. What they do not always notice is how quickly the feeling fades when the supply changes. You can see this most clearly when a man's circumstances shift dramatically. A man loses his job. Suddenly, several people who used to make plans with him become busy. A man's health declines. Suddenly, the people who needed his strength had other priorities. A man's social status drops. Suddenly, friends who used to fight to sit next to him at dinners no longer seem to be at the same dinners. A man's emotional supply runs out because he is going through his own crisis. Suddenly, the people who used to lean on him cannot stand being around him. In each of these cases, the man often interprets the shift as betrayal. It is not always betrayal. Sometimes it is just exposure. The relationships that were structurally dependent on his function simply revealed themselves as what they always were. They were not malicious. They were never built on what he believed they were built on. They were built on a flow of value. When the flow paused, the structure showed itself. There is a man who once threw extravagant dinners for his friends. He paid most of the bills. He arranged the events. He provided the energy. He was, in effect, the host of his own social life. He thought of these gatherings as evidence of a deep, generous brotherhood. Then, a difficult financial season hit. He could no longer host. The dinners did not move to anyone else's home. The energy did not get carried by anyone else. The events simply stopped. The friendships did not adapt to the new conditions. They quietly evaporated. He realized, painfully, that he had not been the center of a brotherhood. He had been the engine of an arrangement. And once the engine stopped, the arrangement disassembled. This is the cold mathematics of much human affection. It is not how all relationships work. It is not how the deepest ones work. But it is how a surprisingly large percentage of them work, especially the ones that look warmest on the surface. Machiavelli observed, with chilling precision, that men are quick to find ways to be deceived by present necessity's source. Translated into modern terms, this means that people will believe their connection to you is profound as long as your presence makes their life easier. The moment you become a source of difficulty, the connection often reveals itself to have been thinner than they, and you, claimed. Accepting this does not require you to become bitter. It requires you to become accurate. Accuracy is one of the most underrated forms of self-protection a man can develop. The man who keeps insisting that all of his relationships are deeper than they are will keep being shocked by exits he should have seen coming. The man who can see, clearly and without sentiment, which relationships are bonded to him and which are bonded to his utility, will be far harder to surprise and far harder to wound at the same depth. This is not coldness. This is structural literacy. You do not have to stop loving people who only love you for what you provide. You just have to stop being deceived about what kind of relationship you are actually inside of. Once you know what something is, you can position it correctly. You can stop over-investing in shallow alliances. You can stop expecting depth from connections that were never structurally capable of producing it. You can adjust your behavior, your access, your transparency, your generosity to match the actual nature of the bond. The danger has never been that people love you for what you provide. The danger has always been not knowing which people are doing exactly that. There is a quiet audit every serious man eventually performs, even if he does not call it that. He sits down with his life in some private moment and begins to look at the people in it. Not with sentiment, not with nostalgia, not with the soft focus filter of shared history. With sober eyes, he begins to ask himself a small set of questions that he has, for most of his adult life, avoided. If I had nothing to give, who would still be here? If I were not useful, who would still pick up the phone? If my circumstances reversed dramatically, whose face would I expect to still appear? If I needed something and could offer nothing in return, whose energy would not change? These are not easy questions. They are not designed to be. They are designed to puncture the comforting fog most men live inside about their relationships. A man can spend 20 years assuming he is surrounded by people who love him, then sit down and answer these questions honestly and discover with a kind of cold clarity that his actual core circle is smaller than he had been pretending. This realization can feel like loss. It is not. It is a correction, because the inflated estimate of his social support was already, in some quiet way, costing him. It was making him distribute his energy too widely, treat too many people as if they were an inner circle, defend the wrong people, invest in the wrong friendships, trust the wrong colleagues, confide in the wrong listeners, give access to the wrong rooms. When the actual numbers come into focus, the strategy of his life can finally be recalibrated. The audit usually reveals a few categories of people. There is a small set of people whose connection to him does not seem to depend on his function. They have been around in seasons when he was rising and in seasons when he was falling. Their tone with them does not seem to track his status. They show up in ways that make no logical sense if they were only interested in what he could provide. These are rare. He does not always have many of them. But the ones who exist are precious, and they are very different from the rest. Then there is a much larger set of people whose connection to him correlates strongly with what he provides. When the supply is strong, they are warm. When the supply is thinner, they are colder. When his usefulness is visible, they appear. When it is not, they recede. Sometimes they reappear later, often when a new wave of supply becomes available. He notices, in retrospect, that he has been mistaking this pattern for friendship. There is also a category of people who, on close inspection, are net extractive. They take more than they give. They appear when something is needed and disappear when something is asked of them. They are not always doing this consciously. Some of them genuinely think they are good friends. They simply cannot see the asymmetry because they have never been asked to. The man has been so generous, so available, so undemanding, that the asymmetry has felt natural to both of them. Finally, there is a category of people who do not even rise to the level of acquaintances when honestly examined. They are a habit. They are background. They have been in his life because they have been in his life. Long-standing connections that have no functional meaning anymore, that have not produced real exchange in years. He keeps them not because they matter, but because removing them would require a conversation or a decision he has not been willing to make. When a man finally categorizes his life this way, he often experiences two contradictory feelings. The first is loneliness, not because he has lost anyone, but because he has finally seen, with clear eyes, that some of the people he was counting on for emotional support were never really there. The numbers in his ledger are smaller than he had been pretending. That can feel like an emergency. The second, slower feeling is relief. Because now, finally, the energy he was spreading across too many people can be concentrated. He can stop pretending. He can stop performing equal investment in all directions. He can give his deepest attention, his sharpest loyalty, his most generous energy to the very few who have, by their patterns, earned access to it. And he can downgrade the rest to the level they actually occupy in his life without having to make a scene about it. This is not cruelty. This is hygiene. The men who refuse to perform this audit pay a steep price. They keep getting blindsided by exits that were always going to come. They keep investing high-stakes loyalty into low-quality connections. They keep being surprised when the same patterns repeat in different costumes. They keep mistaking surface warmth for structural commitment. The men who perform this audit repeatedly, with increasing accuracy, eventually develop a kind of social intelligence that most men never reach. They can see, almost in real time, where they stand in someone's life. They can see whether they are being engaged with as a person or as a function. They can adjust their behavior accordingly. They give less to those who only want their utility. They give more, and more selectively, to those who have proven themselves real. If you can feel an audit beginning to take place inside you, write audit. Because the man who counts honestly is the man who stops being repeatedly robbed by his own optimism about other people. There is a slow, subtle way that providing becomes a performance for the men who get trapped in it. It rarely starts that way. It usually starts with simple decency. A man wants to be helpful. He wants to be useful. He wants to be reliable. He wants the people around him to know that he is the kind of man who can be counted on. He pays the bill. He picks up the slack. He brings the energy. He carries the heavy thing. He listens when others vent. He covers when others fall short. He is consistently more than he has to be. Other people register this quickly. They begin, subtly, to expect it. The decency becomes the baseline. The extraordinary effort becomes the standard. The willingness to give becomes assumed. They stop noticing the gift because the gift never stops arriving. It becomes invisible to them, not because they are evil, but because human beings habituate to constant supply. We almost never thank the air for being there. We only notice it when it is gone. This is the first turn. His giving stops being received as giving and starts being received as a kind of environmental constant, something they live inside, something that no longer requires their gratitude or their reciprocity. Then comes the second turn. He begins, almost imperceptibly, to feel that his value depends on the providing. He starts to suspect, somewhere in the back of his mind, that he is loved because of what he supplies. So he supplies more, he gives more, he shows up more, he pays more, he listens more, he fixes more. He hopes that by increasing the supply, he will deepen the connection. He does not realize that the inverse is happening. The more he provides, the more the people around him relate to him as a provider, not as a person. The role hardens, the mask becomes the face. There is a man whose entire identity has slowly become the act of giving. He is the one his family calls when something needs to be solved. He is the one his friends call when something needs to be funded. He is the one his partner calls when she needs to be reassured. He is generous, dependable, infinitely patient. From the outside, he looks like a hero. From the inside, he is exhausted. He is also, increasingly, alone, because the relationships in his life have stopped being mutual exchanges between two human beings and have become engagements between him and the people who consume what he produces. He cannot rest. If he rests, the supply dips, and immediately the temperature in his relationships changes. He feels the shift even when no one announces it. He learns, painfully, that the warmth he experiences is not really directed at him. It is directed at the steady output he generates. So he keeps producing, he keeps performing, he keeps providing, because the alternative, seeing what would remain if he stopped, is something he is not yet ready to face. This is how a generous man slowly becomes a transactional man without ever meaning to. He becomes a servant, a reliable utility, a familiar presence that other people enjoy without ever fully meeting. He has loved people his whole life. He has not always been loved back at the same depth, and the longer he denies this, the more he doubles down on providing, hoping that quantity will eventually buy him the kind of love he has been mistakenly trying to earn. It will not. Love is not a function of how much you provide. It is a function of whether the people around you are interested in your existence, apart from your provision. If they are, no amount of providing can manufacture more love than is already there. If they are not, No amount of providing can manufacture love that was never there in the first place. This is a brutal but liberating realization. It means that the man who has been working overtime to be loved has been running a strategy that cannot succeed by design. He has been trying to buy depth with a currency that depth does not recognize. The same energy he has been spending in this losing game could have been spent building real love with the few people who were actually interested in him, and building real self-respect inside himself. When he sees this clearly, something inside him begins to shift. He starts noticing how much of his providing was actually a quiet plea for affection. He starts noticing how often he gives in order to be safe, not in order to be generous. He starts noticing how he has been treating his own attention, time, energy, money, like a passport he is constantly renewing in order to be allowed to stay in other people's lives. And he starts, gradually, to stop. Not all at once, not dramatically. He just begins to provide more selectively. He begins to allow some silences to remain unfilled. He begins to let some texts go unanswered. He begins to allow some requests to go undelivered. He begins to test, quietly, who in his life is still interested in him when he is not constantly proving his worth through provision. The results of this test are sometimes brutal. A surprising number of people fade. A smaller number of people get angry, as if his reduction in providing is a personal betrayal. They become irritable, distant, accusatory. They cannot understand why he is suddenly being difficult. They had grown so accustomed to the supply that the slight reduction feels like an attack. Their reaction reveals more about the nature of the connection than any conversation ever could. And a few people, the rarest and most precious, do not react in any of these ways. They simply continue showing up in the same way they had been showing up before. They do not punish him for giving less. They do not pull away. They do not become cold. They are, somehow, fine with the same man, even when his output decreases. These are the people who were never relating to him as a service. These are the people who were quietly, unceremoniously, loving the actual him all along. Until a man takes the risk of providing less, he often cannot tell which is which. This is one of the most expensive forms of social intelligence a man can develop. The willingness to provide less, on purpose, in order to find out who has actually been loving him. There is a specific kind of wound a man carries when he has been loved primarily for his function. It is not the wound of betrayal in the dramatic sense. It is the wound of feeling slightly invisible inside relationships that look, from outside, like love. He shows up, he provides, he performs his role. People express appreciation. They say warm things. They smile at him. They thank him. They invite him back. And yet there is a quiet ache in him that does not match the warmth he is receiving. He notices that nobody in the room ever quite asks who he is, deep down. Nobody ever quite asks how he is, in the serious way, beyond the polite question that expects a polite answer. Nobody ever quite reads him when he is hiding something. Nobody ever quite presses him when he is performing okay, when he is not okay. He moves through his life, surrounded by people who appear to love him, and yet a part of him remains untouched. That untouched part is the wound. It is the part of him that has never been met. The part of him that has never been seen apart from his usefulness. The part of him that has, in some real sense, been invisible inside his own relationships, because everyone has been so focused on what he provides that no one has bothered to look at who he is. This wound is dangerous because it does not look like a wound. It does not bleed visibly. It does not cause obvious pain. It does not show up on his face. He looks fine. He functions. He smiles. He continues to provide. From outside, his life looks rich in connection, but on the inside, in the quiet hour after everyone has left, he feels a kind of low-grade emptiness that he cannot quite name. He has friends. He has a family. He has, in many cases, a partner. He has sometimes children. He has colleagues. He has a community. By any metric, he is socially embedded. And yet, he feels, somehow, alone. The loneliness is not because he is alone. It is because he has spent years building relationships in which his deeper self has never been the actual subject. The relationships are about what he does, what he gives, what he produces, what he carries. They are not about who he is. The wound is the dissonance between his social abundance and his interior solitude. This is one of the great hidden epidemics among certain types of men, the providers, the helpers, the strong ones, the dependable ones, the high-functioning ones. They are surrounded by people. They have many friends, many family members, many colleagues, and many obligations. And they are, in their inner experience, in some quiet way, lonely. They cannot say this out loud easily. The world does not want to hear it. The world wants to keep enjoying their function. So they keep producing, keep providing, keep carrying. And they keep ignoring the small voice inside that says, nobody here actually knows me. There is a man at 45 who has spent his entire adult life being the one who shows up, the one who fixes, the one who funds, the one who listens, the one who manages everyone else's drama while his own remains untouched. He goes to a wedding, smiling, congratulating, making sure logistics are handled. He drives home alone afterward. The car is quiet. The road is quiet. He is quiet. And in that quiet, he allows himself finally to feel what he has been pushing down for years. He has been loved, he realizes, in a particular and limited way. He has been loved as a function. He has not been, in most of his relationships, loved as a man. He does not know what to do with this realization. He does not have the language for it. He just sits with the weight of it on the drive home, and somewhere inside him, a long dormant question begins to form. Who would love me if I had nothing to give? That question, once it appears, does not go away. It begins to organize his life. He begins to test it, gently at first. He begins to reveal more of himself in small ways to certain people, to see what happens. He begins to let his vulnerability show in safe doses, to see if the warmth remains when he is not just producing for others. He begins to allow some of his needs to surface, instead of always being the one who absorbs everyone else's needs. The results are uneven. Some people, sensing the shift, become uncomfortable. They had built their relationship with him around his role as a provider, and his transition into being a fuller human being threatens the arrangement. They withdraw. They subtly punish him for becoming more than the function they had wanted him to perform. Other people, sometimes surprisingly, lean in. They had quietly been waiting to know him as a person, but had been kept at a distance by his constant performance of utility. Once he begins to soften the performance and reveal himself, they are eager to engage. The relationship deepens. He begins to see, through this experiment, which of his connections were architectural and which were emotional. The architectural ones were built on his function. They cannot survive his transition. The emotional ones were always interested in him as a person. They thrive in the new arrangement. The wound does not vanish in this process, but it changes. It is no longer the silent ache of invisibility. It becomes, instead, a teacher. It tells him where to invest, where to withdraw, what to expect, what to demand. The wound becomes a navigational instrument. This is the second great gift hidden inside the painful realization that some people never loved you. It teaches you to seek and recognize and prioritize the ones who actually do. There is a subtle trap that catches many high-functioning men. It is the trap of being indispensable. When a man is highly capable, highly generous, highly reliable, there is a tendency for the people around him to gradually arrange their lives around him. They depend on him to solve them. They depend on him to host. They depend on him to lead. They depend on him to fund. They depend on him to absorb the chaos that would otherwise touch them. He becomes the central pillar in a structure that no one else is interested in maintaining. From outside, this looks like power. From inside, it is often a slow form of imprisonment. He cannot rest, because if he rests, the structure begins to wobble. He cannot leave, because if he leaves, the system collapses on the people he loves. He cannot ask for help, because the entire arrangement was built on the premise that he does not need it. He cannot allow weakness to show, because his weakness has been priced out of the relationships he is in. Other people respond to his indispensability with affection that he eventually learns to read correctly. They love him, yes. But they love him in a particular way. They love him the way a city loves its power grid. They are grateful for him. They depend on him. They notice immediately when he is not functioning. But they are not in a relationship with him. They are in a relationship with his function. The intimacy they express is real, but it is constrained by the role he plays in their lives. This is why so many indispensable men feel, deep inside, that they are still alone in a crowd of people who claim to love them. The love is real in its own way, but it is conditional. It is conditional on him continuing to be the man who carries the weight. The moment he is no longer that man, the love begins to thin. There is a man who is the central figure in his extended family. He has been the one everyone calls. He has been the one everyone leans on. He has financed crisis. He has settled disputes. He has driven people to hospitals. He has counseled the heartbroken. He has covered the failures of the irresponsible. He has done it all without complaint, with what looks like infinite generosity. Then one season of his own life arrives, in which he himself is in crisis. He is the one who needs to be carried. He is the one who needs someone else to drive him to the appointment. He is the one who needs the emotional support, the financial cushion, the time, the energy, the strength. He looks around. The people he has carried for decades are, with one or two exceptions, surprisingly unavailable. They have their own problems, their own busy lives, their own reasons. The love they have always claimed for him is, in his hour of need, oddly thin. They do not show up the way he showed up for them. They send well wishes. They make brief appearances. They do not stay. They do not carry. They do not absorb. They cannot be what he was, because that is not the relationship they were ever actually inside of. They were inside of an arrangement in which he carried and they received. The reverse was never seriously part of the deal, even if everyone, including him, had pretended otherwise. In that season, a kind of clarity arrives that nothing else could have produced. He sees that his indispensability was not a position of power. It was a position of solitude disguised as importance. He had been the center of many people's lives in the sense that they depended on him. He had not been the center of many people's love in the sense that they would have rearranged their lives to make sure he was held. These are two completely different things, and many men confuse them their entire lives. The lesson is not to stop providing. The lesson is to stop confusing providing with being loved. To stop interpreting other people's gratitude as evidence of depth. To stop expecting reciprocity from structures that were never built for it. To stop investing the most precious parts of yourself in relationships that are quietly, structurally, organized around your usefulness. The man who learns this lesson early begins to design his life differently. He becomes more careful about the kind of indispensability he allows. He starts saying no to becoming the central pillar in systems where he is the only one carrying the weight. He starts cultivating relationships in which his weakness is allowed, in which his rest is honored, in which his needs are not a threat to the bond. He begins to build, intentionally, a small inner circle that can hold him as a man, not just as a function. He does not become bitter. He becomes selective. He still provides when providing is right. He still helps when helping is wise. He still gives when giving is real. But he no longer mistakes the role for love. He no longer thinks that if he just provides more, the people around him will eventually love him more deeply. He has seen the math. He knows it does not work that way. And so his life, slowly, rearranges around a different center, not his function, himself. If you want to know who someone actually is in your life, observe them when you stop supplying. This is one of the cruelest and most clarifying instruments a man has at his disposal. It does not require confrontation. It does not require accusation. It does not require him to test anyone in dramatic ways. It simply requires him to reduce the steady flow of value he has been pouring into his relationships and observe what happens. The reduction does not have to be punitive. It does not have to be a manipulation. It can be as natural as a change in life circumstances. He moves to a different city. His income changes. His schedule becomes tighter. His emotional bandwidth narrows because of his own season. Whatever the reason, the supply temporarily contracts. And in that contraction, the people around him reveal themselves. Some people stay exactly the same. They notice that he has less to give. They do not punish him for it. They do not subtly withdraw. They do not become irritable. They show up with the same warmth, the same interest, the same engagement. Their connection to him is not contingent on what is flowing out of him. They are interested in him as a person, not as a producer of value. These are the rare ones. These are the ones the audit was trying to identify all along. Other people change tone. They become slightly more distant. They text less. They cancel more. They are warm when they see him, but the proactive energy they used to direct at him has somehow vanished. They are not openly hostile. They are simply less interested. The friendship is still nominally intact, but the temperature has dropped by a few degrees. These are the people whose connection to him was to some extent built on his supply. They are not necessarily bad people. They are simply people whose interest in him was less stable than they had previously implied. Some people become openly resentful. They begin to treat his reduction in supply as a kind of personal injury. They make comments. They make jokes that are not quite jokes. They imply that he has changed, that he has become selfish, that he is no longer the man they knew. Their resentment is, in its own way, revealing. It tells him that they had grown so accustomed to his supply that the very idea of reduction feels like betrayal to them. They had begun to see his providing as something owed to them, rather than something given freely. Their resentment is the unmasking of an entitlement they had been quietly nursing for years. Some people disappear entirely. They simply fade. They do not announce their departure. They do not have a final conversation. They drift out of the frame, and one day he realizes he has not heard from them in months, in some cases years. They had been close, in the sense of frequent contact, but they had never been close in the sense of structural loyalty. Their proximity to him had been a function of what he provided. With the supply reduced, the proximity dissolves on its own. There is nothing to fight. There is no one to confront. They just vanish, taking with them the version of the relationship he had previously believed in. Each of these responses is information. The man who pays attention learns more about his actual social ecology in a single year of reduced supply than he would in 10 years of generous giving. He learns who his real allies are. He learns who his clients were. He learns who his casual associates were. He learns who his quiet enemies were, hiding inside the appearance of friendship. He learns who, in retrospect, had been benefiting from him in ways he had not even noticed. This is again not a reason for bitterness. It is a reason for calibration. The relationships that remain after the contraction are the ones worth investing in. They have passed a test that words could never have administered. They have proven themselves through the only currency that matters in the long run, which is the willingness to be present, even when the immediate benefits decrease. The man can now direct his deeper energies toward these people, knowing that the investment will not be silently liquidated the next time his circumstances shift. The relationships that fell away during the contraction can be reassessed. Some of them may be allowed back in, with a clearer understanding of what they are. Others should not be allowed back in, regardless of what they ask. The man does not have to make these decisions emotionally. He can make them strategically, based on the data the contraction has provided. He is no longer guessing about the nature of his relationships. He is observing. And, perhaps most importantly, he is no longer being deceived by his own optimism. He has seen the actual shape of his social world. That shape may be different from the one he had imagined. It may be smaller. It may be quieter. It may include fewer of the people he had once invested heavily in. But it is real. And a man who knows what is real can plan accordingly. He can build, repair, withdraw, and invest in a way that matches the world as it actually is, rather than as he had hoped it would be. This is one of the most powerful things a man can do. He can convert disappointment into clarity, and clarity into strategy. It is important to be careful here. Not every relationship in which someone benefits from your provision is fake. Not every connection that involves utility is shallow. Reliance is part of love. Healthy love includes a degree of mutual usefulness. People who love each other depend on each other. They help each other. They benefit from each other's presence. There is nothing wrong with this. It is in fact one of the most beautiful aspects of human life. We are made to need each other. The problem is not reliance. The problem is when reliance is the entire substance of the relationship. Real love and pure reliance can look similar on the surface. Both involve people who appreciate what you do for them. Both involve people who depend on you in some way. Both involve gratitude, affection, and warmth. The difference is what happens when the supply changes. In real love, the connection survives changes in supply. The two people care about each other beyond the immediate exchange of value. When one is in a difficult season, the other adjusts. When one is unable to provide what they used to provide, the other accommodates. The shape of the relationship may change, but the foundation remains intact. There is a mutual interest in each other's existence, separate from the immediate utility. In pure reliance, the connection is largely defined by the supply. When the supply changes, the connection wobbles. When the supply ceases, the connection often dissolves. The two people may have warm feelings for each other, but those feelings do not have enough independent weight to survive a serious shift in the practical arrangement. The way to tell the difference is not what people say, it is what they do under conditions where the easy benefits have been removed. A man who is grieving discovers very quickly which of his relationships were love and which were reliant. People who only knew how to receive from him often do not know what to do with him in his grief. People who actually loved him show up, awkwardly perhaps, but consistently. They sit with him. They make space for the version of him that cannot perform. They do not require him to be the source of joy in the room. A man who is going through a financial reversal discovers very quickly which of his relationships were love and which were reliant. Some friends stay the same. Some friends slowly disappear. Some friends become uncomfortable, as if his financial struggle is somehow contagious. The relationships that endure the reversal are the ones that were never primarily about money. The relationships that vanish are the ones that quietly were. A man going through a deep personal change, becoming more disciplined, more sovereign, more selective with his energy, discovers very quickly which of his relationships were love and which were reliant. Real friends celebrate his growth, even if it inconveniences them. People who were relying on his old patterns often resist the change, sometimes openly, sometimes through subtle resentment. The man's evolution exposes which connections were rooted in him and which were rooted in his earlier self. None of these tests are perfect. People are complicated. Some friends are temporarily incapable of showing up for serious reasons that have nothing to do with their love for him. Some relationships go through difficult patches that do not necessarily reveal their underlying nature. The point is not to perform a single binary test and condemn everyone who fails. The point is to gather information over time. Patterns, tendencies, recurring behaviors. A man who has been watching long enough begins to develop an internal map of his relationships. He knows with some accuracy who is real, who is conditional, who is parasitic, who is benign but shallow, who is unstable, who is rare and precious. He stops being shocked by exits. He stops being deceived by warmth. He stops mistaking volume of contact for depth of bond. He moves through his social life with a more sober understanding of what is actually in front of him. This is not loneliness. This is sovereignty. He still loves. He still gives. He still receives. He still trusts me. But he trusts with calibration. He gives with discernment. He loves with eyes open. He no longer hands the same level of access to every face that smiles at him. He no longer mistakes the early warmth of a relationship for the structural test of time. This is one of the most important shifts a man can make in his social life. It does not require him to become cold. It requires him to become accurate. Once he is accurate, his warmth is somewhere safe to live. He stops scattering it across a crowd that cannot hold it. He starts concentrating it in the few places that can, and in those places, the love he gives is finally returned in kind, not because he was demanding it, but because he is finally in relationships that are structurally capable of it. A man who has been loved primarily for what he provides often has a complicated relationship with generosity afterward. If he has not done the work, he can swing into bitterness. He can become withholding. He can decide that since some people loved him only for what he gave, he will give nothing to anyone. He hardens. He becomes the cynical man at the edge of every gathering, the one who keeps everyone at arm's length, the one who never picks up the bill, never lifts a finger, never offers a hand. He thinks he is protecting himself. He is, in fact, only flipping the script of his earlier mistake. He has stopped overgiving, but he has not become wise. He has merely become guarded. This is not freedom. This is a reaction. The man who has actually integrated the lesson does something different. He does not stop being generous. He becomes strategically generous. He continues to give, sometimes lavishly, but he gives with eyes open. He no longer gives in order to buy love. He gives in order to express the kind of man he is. He gives because he can. He gives because it is in his nature. But he gives without expectation, and he gives selectively, and he gives in a way that is no longer entangled with his sense of worth. This is one of the most underrated forms of masculine maturity. Strategic generosity has a few features that distinguish it from compulsive generosity. It is given from strength, not from fear. The compulsive giver gives because he is afraid that if he does not give, he will not be liked. The strategic giver gives because he has the capacity to give, and giving is consistent with the man he wants to be. It is given without internal scorecards that the recipient does not know about. The compulsive giver tracks every gift mentally, then resents when it is not returned, even though he never agreed with the other person that it would be. The strategic giver gives without that hidden ledger. If he gives something, he gives it freely. If he does not want to give it, he does not give it. He does not give while secretly resenting the gift. It is given selectively. The compulsive giver gives to everyone, often equally, which means he gives the same level of care to the friend who has shown up for him for 15 years and to the acquaintance who has only ever extracted from him. The strategic giver distinguishes. He does not give the deepest forms of his attention, energy, and resources to people who have not earned access to them. It is given without performance. The compulsive giver often gives in part because he wants others to see his generosity. He wants social credit. He wants the witnesses. The strategic giver is comfortable giving quietly, without observers, sometimes without the recipient even knowing where the gift came from. His generosity is not a performance for an audience. It is an expression of his own internal alignment. And, perhaps most importantly, strategic generosity is paired with strategic withholding. The strategic giver knows when to give and also when not to give. He knows that giving to certain people in certain situations is not generosity. It is enabling. It is reinforcing patterns that are not good for them or for him. The compulsive giver finds it impossible to withhold. He gives whenever asked, sometimes when not asked, because his identity is built around being the one who provides. The strategic giver can withhold without guilt because his identity is built around being a man, not a service. He gives because giving is one of the expressions of his manhood, not because giving is the substance of it. There is a man who has spent years overgiving and has now begun to recalibrate. He no longer picks up every check. He still picks up some. He no longer pays for everyone's problems. He still pays for some when it is wise. He no longer rushes to fix every emotional crisis of every friend. He still helps, When the friend is real and the situation calls for it, from the outside, he looks slightly less generous than he used to. From the inside, he is more generous than he has ever been. Because his generosity is now intentional. It is no longer a survival strategy. It is no longer a campaign for affection. It is no longer a tax he pays for the right to be in other people's lives. His generosity now arrives in such a way that the people who receive it know they have received something. It is not the constant drizzle that goes unnoticed because it never stops. It is the deliberate gift from a man who is no longer obligated to give. As a result, his generosity actually creates connection, rather than dissolving it through oversupply. This is the mature form of giving. It is not a denial of the man's nature as a provider. It is the integration of that nature with discernment. He gives, but he gives like a man, not like an applicant. He gives, but he gives from sovereignty, not from need. He gives, but he gives in a way that respects both himself and the people he is giving to. And in this way, he stops being repeatedly betrayed by his own generosity, while still allowing himself to be generous in the ways that matter most. After all of this work, after all of this seeing, after all of this auditing and recalibrating and restructuring, something quiet remains. It is not bitter. It is not a resignation. It is not loneliness. It is something closer to clarity, paired with a kind of warmer, more mature love. The man who has fully internalized that some people never loved him, that they loved what he provided, does not arrive at hatred. He arrives at sober affection. He can still love the people who never quite loved him, but he loves them with appropriate distance. He understands them. He does not require them to be other than what they are. He no longer demands depth from souls that do not have it for him. He no longer expects loyalty from connections that were never built on that foundation. He no longer waits for the day they will finally understand him, finally appreciate him, finally see him. He has stopped that wait. The wait was the wound. Now it is over. He still has people in his life. Some of them are old, some of them are new, some of them are family, some of them are friends, some of them are partners, but the configuration of his life has changed. The people closest to him are now, by his own design, the ones who have proven themselves capable of loving him beyond his function. The people more distant from him are those who in different ways were primarily attached to his utility. He is not punishing them, he is positioning them. He gives them what they actually have access to, not more, not less. In the deepest places of his life, the small number of people who survived the audit, who weathered the contraction, who proved themselves real, became disproportionately precious. He invests in them with a depth he could not have managed when his attention was scattered. He pours into them the kind of presence that was once being spread thin across many. They feel this. They respond to it. The relationships become in some quiet way exceptional. Not perfect, not effortless, but real, heavier, truer. And underneath all of this, there is a self that has been rebuilt. The man who has gone through this realization is not the same man who entered it. He is more sober, more discerning, more patient with himself. He has stopped using providing as proof of his worth. He has begun, instead, to derive his worth from a quieter, more internal source. He knows who he is. He knows what he is willing to give. He knows what he is no longer willing to spend on relationships that cannot hold it. He knows the price of his own depth, and he no longer offers it on discount. When new people enter his life, he does not rush to provide. He does not lead with utility. He does not buy his way into relevance. He shows up as a person first. He lets the people in front of him reveal themselves over time. He does not give them his deepest energies until they have shown that they are interested in him in some way that goes beyond what he can offer them. He is patient. He is calm. He is no longer hungry to be loved. He has stopped chasing. That stopping is what allows real love to find him, because the people who can love him for who he actually is are repelled by the desperate version of him. They cannot connect with a man who is auditioning for them. They can connect only with a man who is at home, by himself, who is not performing, who is not buying, who is not constantly trying to prove that he is worth keeping around. The day the man stops trying to earn love is, paradoxically, the day he becomes most capable of receiving it. So the realization that some people never loved him does not, in the end, leave him in the cold. It leaves him in the truth. And from the truth, a different kind of life becomes possible. A life with fewer people perhaps, but with more love. A life in which his providing is one of many expressions of his manhood, not the whole of it. A life in which his function is a small part of who he is, not a substitute for who he is. He still gives, he still helps, he still provides. He is still, in many ways, the strong one, the dependable one, the man you can count on. But he is also, finally, a man whose interior is no longer being silently rented out to people who never agreed to truly know him. He has reclaimed the territory that was being used. He has fenced off what should never have been a public utility. He has, in some sense, come home to himself. There is a strange and quiet sweetness in this. It is not euphoric, it is not dramatic. It is the sweetness of a man who has stopped lying to himself about his relationships and can therefore enjoy them more accurately. It is the sweetness of a man who is no longer haunted by the secret suspicion that nobody really sees him, because he has gone to the trouble of building the few relationships in which he actually is seen. It is the sweetness of a man who can love generously without losing himself in the giving. This is what is on the other side of the painful truth. Some people never loved you. They loved what you provided. That sentence used to feel like a death sentence to your past. Read it now with the distance you have earned, and notice how it has transformed. It is no longer an accusation against everyone. It is a clarification. It allows you to see, finally, who actually loves you and who never did. It allows you to invest accordingly. It allows you to provide with eyes open, give with sovereignty, and receive with discernment. It allows you to stop bleeding your finest energies into structures that could never have held them. It allows you to stop expecting depth from people who never agreed to it. It is, in the end, not a curse. It is a map. And the man who is willing to read that map without flinching will, slowly, surely, find his way into a life where he is loved, not for what he provides, but for who he actually is. That is the life worth providing for. If this monologue gave language to something you have been carrying for a long time without being able to name, leave a like. In the comments, tell me which section hit hardest. And subscribe if you want more monologues built for men who have stopped buying love through giving and started building lives where their real selves are finally what is being chosen.